So we are starting 5.1. It's the nth roots and rational exponents notes. This will help you with the 5.4 practice on big ideas. And this is going to be video number 1. We're going to be finding the nth roots. Okay. So the big essential question for 5.1 is how can you use rational exponents to represent a power involving a radical? Okay, so that'll make a little more sense as we go. So we have, first we need to cover some key vocabulary. Okay, so we have the nth root of a. For an integer n greater than 1, if b to that nth power, okay, that n integer, equals a, then b is the nth root of a. And it is written as n radical a, okay? So it's the nth roots. It can be a square root is the only time we actually don't write the number there. Otherwise, we write a number there. Our next vocabulary term is the index of a radical. So n is that index of the radical, okay? That integer n. All right. So then we need to talk about some core concepts here. So the main thing when we're dealing with the nth root of a, okay, n is a integer greater than 1, remember that, and a has to be a real number. Okay, so no imaginary numbers there. If n, so if you're taking an odd root, or I'm sorry, an even root, and a is greater than 0, so it's a positive number, or I'm sorry, less than 0, so it's a negative number, you cannot have an nth root, okay? Can't take a square root or a fourth root or a sixth root of a negative number, okay? That's where we get that imaginary number from. So we'll have no real roots, okay? But if you're taking the nth root and n is even and a is 0, then you're going to have one real root, and that root is going to be 0. The root of 0 is 0. And that rule actually goes for when n is odd as well. Okay. If you're taking an even root of a positive number, you're going to have two real roots. It's the plus and minus of the nth root of a. Okay. And it can be written as both ways. Nth root of a can also be written as a to the 1 over n power. Okay. So if you have a fraction that is, or a power that is a fraction that is 1 over n, then that's the same thing as saying it's the root n, okay? Now, if n is an odd integer, so you're taking an odd root, like a cube root or a fifth root or whatever, and a is negative, you're going to have one real root, okay? And it's going to be a negative number. I already talked about if it's 0, always a nth root of 0 is 0. If it's greater than 0, so it's a positive number, you're still only going to have one real root, and it is going to be a positive root, okay? Now, the next thing we need to talk about are rational exponents, okay? So if a is 1 over n, so if a to 1 over n power is the nth root of a, whenever it's a fraction, that denominator is the root, the top number is the power. So if we look here, we have a to the m over n power. M is the power and n is the root, okay? It has more exact terminology than that, but that's how we've always written things, is like, so that top number m is just a to the m power, okay? And then when you have it divided by n, that means that's the root. Now you can write it either way, okay? And then just don't forget, if your power is negative, that just means it turns into a fraction, so it's 1 over. That's how you get rid of the negative powers. That was from our rules that we went over in the chapter 5 opener, okay? If you have a negative power, it moves it from the numerator to the denominator, or vice versa, moves it from the denominator to the numerator, whatever, to get rid of the negative power. All right, so let's actually get started here. So we want to find the nth roots And I'm going to start with number 1. Okay, so we need to find the indicated nth roots of A, root or roots, okay? So in this case, n is 3 and A is negative 216. So that is the third root. Remember, it's the nth root, so 3 is the root of negative 216. Okay, so we need to remember our rules here. N is odd, so we're in this column here. A is less than 0, so I'm going to have 1 nth root, okay? All right. Well, I'm sorry, 1 nth root, 1 real root. Okay, so this can be written just like this, and you can get an answer. Or you can write it as negative 216 to the 1/3 power. Answer will still be the same, okay? And the way I like to look at this is, since this is a power or a root of 3, what cubed to the 3rd power gives me negative 216? Okay. So you would think of, okay, so something cubed is going to equal a negative 216. That's how we want to look at that. And we need to kind of figure out what that is. So if you can do it in your head, that's awesome. Do that. If you can't, your calculator can do it for you because they're really smart. Okay. Now this one's pretty easy. I can do this one in my head, but because I had to memorize when I was in school all the powers of any number like 1 through 7, I think, and it was so hard. But anyways, I'm not going to make you do that. So you got these lovely calculators. So if you go now on here, we have a square root, but this is not a square root. It's a 3rd root. Well, if you go to math, you happen to have a 3rd root. Go to that math menu. 3rd root is number 4. See, it gives me that 3rd root now, and I can just type in negative 216. And it's negative 6. So this is negative 6. This is the exact same thing, so it'll also be negative 6, but if you don't believe me, you can type in your calculator, negative 216, you put it in parentheses, so it also takes the negative to the power, and you go to the power of 1/3. It's also negative 6, better be, because they were supposed to be equivalent, right? So your answer here is negative 6. So that means if I were to take negative 6 and I cube it, I get negative 216, okay? So that's a way to think of this, is I'm trying to figure out what this equals. So what to, if I ignore the root here, what to that power gives me that number, okay? And that was negative 6. All right, let's go on to number 2. Okay, now this time I have the 4th root of 81. Okay, again, you can also write that as 81 to the 1/4 power, but I usually just leave them like this. Okay, so I go back to my rules here. N is even this time, and A is greater than 0. Okay, so I'm going to have 2 roots. It's going to be the positive and negative of this. Okay, so I need to put that plus and minus out there. Okay, all right. So what times itself 4 times, because if I take it to the 4th power, it would equal 81. So something to the 4th power equals 81. Now, if you can do that in your head, that's great. I know the square root of 81 is 9. And then I can take the square root of 9 and get 3. And those 2 square roots together is 4 roots. So I know my answer should be, plus and minus 3. Okay. Again, this time the calculator is a little different. If you do the 4th root, you have a square root, the math menu has a cube root, but if you want roots that are bigger than that, you need to type the number first. So I want the 4th root, so I'm gonna push 4, and I go to math. Number 5 has an X root. That means whatever number I typed in is gonna become that root, so number 5. So now I have a fourth root. Some calculators don't put it up there. It'll just have it written in front. But that's okay. As long as you use that math menu, it'll work. And I'm doing this of 81. Now it only gives me the positive number. You have to remember the rules from this, okay? And really the only time you have two of them is when you have an even root of a positive number, okay? All right, so because 3 to the fourth power is 81, negative 3 to the fourth power is also 81. And that's why we get the plus and minus. Okay. All right. So now you can go to the practice and do problems number 2, 4, 7, 8, and 9.